We talk comics, movies, TV, pop culture, all the fun stuff that people love to talk about. So thank you so much for joining us.
You bet.
Okay, so we're going to start off with, I think, first I want to start off and just say it's really, it's terrific. I mean, you're going through a renaissance. I mean, you're involved in so many exciting projects right now. What kind of spurred everything on? I mean, you've got Stranger Things 2, you've got Red Oaks.
Well, the real reason was I didn't want to do this interview and have nothing. So I thought if I plan ahead, knowing that we'd be talking this month, I said, let me, get things in motion so that I don't embarrass myself or bring down the quality of your little show. That was my real thing.
It's not hard.
It's kind of funny. It's the one real plan that everybody has in show business is that there's no plan, and a whole bunch of things that I've done seem to all be coming out around the same time, which is, again, not my planning. But the Stranger Things is that's a wild ride. That it's very rare that a show is that in demand and that of the moment. So it's pretty cool to watch and see. We had the premiere last week.
Yep.
And they just showed all around the world. There were these huge screenings and just fans and like in every corner of the world. Oh my goodness, this is a big deal, and it's so well done. It's deserved. It's a really good show. But it's just there are a lot of great shows. Not very few pop like that one does. So that's been fun to be a part of for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely a phenomenon. There's no question about it. Were you a fan of the show prior to the Duffers coming to you with this role?
Yeah, I was, but it was so quick. I mean, the show, it was literally last summer, and the show, I think, came out on a Friday. And that Monday, my 16-year-old son said to me, have you heard of this new show? And I had not. He said, oh, you should check it out. It's really great. And that same day, like within like a half an hour, I got a call that the Duffer Brothers wanted to meet me, and my agent said, have you ever heard of this brand new show? I said, of course I have. I have my finger on the pulse of America, man. And so luckily I did know about it. And they said, well, I want to meet you tomorrow. I went, okay. So literally I hung up and I watched the first couple of episodes, and I was hooked. I thought, wow, it was clearly, when somebody is just firing on all cylinders, you can tell.
Yeah.
You can tell a good director, you can tell a good writer right up front. And from the get-go, that's just like, oh, this is good. It's very specific, and whatever decisions they've made, they have locked into it. And it was really good. So when I met with them, I was already a fan, but it was so early on the curve. It was literally the first week that it had come out.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And shortly thereafter, I sat and watched them all, and it was great, And this year, so they had a very vague, they didn't tell me much about my character. They said, we just have this idea that you're this doctor, and we don't know if he's good or he's bad. And I said, do you know? He said, we're not sure. So I said, all right, well, which is really fun to kind of play because you have to straddle, you don't quite know where he's going to land. And even watching it now, I haven't finished. I have like 2 episodes left. And I was thinking, if I watch this objectively, it's like they really delay as late as they can what this guy is. And a lot of the stories, a lot of the characters and storylines, they just keep moving along, but you don't have the answers. And that's just great storytelling.
Yeah, at the time of this interview, I'm midway through episode 5 of the new season. So
well, there you go.
So I'm definitely... I'm definitely straddling right along with you. I think, it's definitely much more character-driven versus event-driven, which was like the first season was a big event. So very exciting to see kind of where it's all headed. And
they've sort of done the best of both worlds because season 2 is a lot of events coming that you haven't seen yet.
Yeah.
And so they're definitely dramatic events. But what makes it stand out, and I think the reason people are tuning in, is the characters, and there's a beautiful character stuff going on with the kids, and everybody has sort of evolved, and it's a year later, and they're more mature, and they're going through different stuff. So they have really written that beautifully. But it's funny, there's any number of things you could watch if you just want to watch scary, if you want to watch things explode, or you want to watch creatures. But ultimately, what people tune in for is is the characters and the stories. So they have really got all their bases covered.
Yeah, absolutely. My co-host is a huge Aliens fan, and I can't help but see the influence of this character from your character in Aliens. So
yeah, and they're sort of unabashed in their influence. You know, they're big fans of that movie and of Jim Cameron and a whole bunch of other movies too. They have a really deep and wide breadth of movies. You know, when they met me, when I asked, I said, like, how do you guys even know me? They're half my age, and they said, well, and I assumed it was Aliens. And they said, well, when we were kids, our father really turned us on to Diner. I went, wow, that's very different. You don't really see that, although there is. They said we're putting in a Diner reference here that is kind of subtle. And I read the script. I went, yeah, I don't even see it. I don't get it. That's how subtle it is.
Yeah.
But it's funny because people have caught it, and it's kind of a nice little cookie they tossed in there.
That's neat. Neat little Easter egg.
Sure.
I have to you have to take a step back into the 80s for me and talk to me about your Aliens role real briefly. How did you end up getting the audition for that? How did you end up getting that job? At that point you were known as a stand-up comedian. So to kind of enter this more dramatic role in a sci-fi film, how did that kind of come about?
It came about in really the most boring conventional ways. I went in for an audition, and I think, if I'm remembering, I think at the time Jim Cameron had it in mind that he wanted to put as much of a deflect as much as he could and have somebody that you would assume that you would least suspect of being bad. So maybe he started looking at comics. I don't remember that. I just remember I went in for an audition and left, and I didn't hear. When you don't hear in a week or two, you just go, I guess that didn't happen. And it was like 3 or 4 months later when I had forgotten about it. And they said, you got it. I said, I got what? And I said, oh, you're kidding. And they said, yeah, so they had, and I guess there was something that he wanted, or something that I was young enough, and perhaps maybe because I was unknown and I didn't strike. At first glance, you don't think this guy's evil. That maybe they could delay the revelation. Although I got to say, audiences pretty quickly went, that guy's no good. We don't trust him. We don't trust the company. We don't trust anybody. Certainly not this guy.
Yeah. How do you juggle comedy and drama? I mean, again, your roots are stand-up, and kind of coming in as comic relief, and then obviously Mad About You in the 90s. So what do you prefer? Do you prefer comedies? Do you prefer dramas? And how do you juggle the two?
It's not really a juggling thing. Certain things, the story and the piece that you're doing will dictate what it is that you're bringing. Like this is, Stranger Things and Aliens is certainly not comic. To me, I actually love the things that I write, and the things that I love watching are things that actually straddle both. And Mad About You was certainly a comedy, but I think the pieces that people remember as well as the comedies, is the dramatic moments or the emotional moments or the connections. So it's
sure.
And they work together. Sometimes, to me, a great scene is when we have a touching moment, and then you can have a funny moment right in the middle of it, and they service each other. You care more about the drama because you've enjoyed and you've laughed with these people, and sometimes you need a joke to sort of pop the moment. So they really can work together. I mean, certainly in Stranger Things, it's certainly not funny, but in the character, there's certainly. His job was to sort of put everybody at ease. That was really clear intention, and knowing full well that this town has been screwed by this government, by this project.
Sure.
So, as a character, I knew what I was coming into, and I was like, listen, I know you don't want to trust me, but I'm going to have to ask you to trust me. Usually, when somebody says trust me, it's because you're not supposed to trust them. I always love when Trump says, believe me. I went, well, why'd you say believe me? I would have believed you right up to the point you said believe me. Why did you assume I wouldn't believe you?
We kind of touched upon it a little bit, but, the 80s nostalgia aspect to the show, I mean, it's big everywhere. Even, another series you're involved with, Red Oaks, has this 80s nostalgia theme experience. What do you think is so fascinating about this decade that has got people kind of coming back to it?
I don't know that it is. I don't think there's anything particularly more interesting about the 80s than the 90s or the 70s or the 60s. I think what happens is filmmakers come of age in a certain time, whatever it is they were born, and they go back to their sweet spot. And so I think these guys were born in the 80s, so it wasn't really their time, but they grew up on those movies and felt an affinity to them. So that's where their creative sweet spot is. In Red Oaks, Greg Jacobs, who produced and created the show and wrote it, he with his partner, but it came out of his life. He was in the 80s was working as a tennis pro, or at a country club, and he had all these stories. And he had worked with Steven Soderbergh for years. He was his assistant director and producer, and he would tell these stories. And one day Soderbergh says, "You got to write these down. There's a show here. That's a show," and it became Red Oaks. And it's funny, this other show that's going to air in November on Hulu, was called There's Johnny. It was a show I've been working on for years, and again, just happens to finally come together, and it's coming out now with everything else is coming out. And it takes place in '72, and it wasn't really like because I was nostalgic, but it sort of, that was there from the beginning. We wanted to do a show about that period, I don't know. I mean, I wasn't longing for nostalgia, but it was a very interesting time, and '72 was when Johnny Carson moved the Tonight Show from New York to Burbank. Okay. And it sort of reimagined his show and really took off and became the cultural touchstone that it became. And it was an exciting time because that sort of gave birth to the comedy clubs and all of that world. And it was an exciting time historically too. It was, I mean, every period has their friction in their news, but it was Watergate, it was Vietnam, it was the very, very beginnings of women's lib and feminism, and East Coast coming to the West, and West Coast becoming more prominent in American culture. So, and largely, a large part due to Johnny Carson. So there was an organic reason we went there.
And it's a mix too, right? It's a mix of both. Real
well, and we use actual footage, clips of Johnny, because it's behind the scenes of the Tonight Show. So it's about a 20-year-old kid who comes out from Nebraska because he sent in a letter and he thought he got an invitation. He thought he had a job, and he shows up and he had no job at all, but he was just a nice kid and he sort of fell into it, and he ends up staying there. So it's really seeing that world through the eyes of this very green kid, and he meets this woman who's very Hollywood and very Beverly Hills, and she's never seen a guy like him, and he's certainly never seen a woman like her. Yeah. And so we have these stories, these fictional characters, all running around getting a show ready for the Tonight Show, and then when they see the show, it's actually Johnny, and it's actually the Tonight Show. So we don't have there's no actor playing Johnny, because I don't think you can do that. Everybody knows Johnny Carson pretty well. So it's really, and it's done pretty seamlessly, and when you see it, and to this day, when I see an episode, I keep being surprised, like, oh my gosh, there's Johnny. It's like it's as if that's why the show's called There's Johnny, because you just don't expect him to be there. And it's very comforting, for those of us who there's a whole generation or two that don't know Johnny Carson that came of age after he was gone off the air. Yeah. And I hope they get a piece of what he was, but it's not necessary. You don't need to know Johnny. It's not a show about Johnny. It's a show backstage,
around Johnny.
Show business. But he was, for those of us who do remember him fondly, it's such a kick every week to see a little piece of him, and we integrate it into the story. A lot of times, we'd find a funny clip on Johnny's show, and we'd say, okay, how do we write backwards from that? How do we have our story collide with what happened on the air? And sometimes it goes the other way, and we write a story and we go looking for a clip to fit in. Yeah. But there is something about all these shows that you make a good point. I think there is when something is in the past, there's something sort of warming about it. It's safe. Yeah. There's so much news and there's so much alert and there's so much information, and it's constantly moving, and it's tiresome and it's exhausting. Yeah. So when you get a chance to go back, even if it's a dramatic show or a thrilling show, there's a comfort that you have in, okay, this is in the past. I can go visit this. I've already lived through the 80s, so now I can enjoy it with a little bit more with the distance.
Yeah. It's funny. You said a couple things that I thought was of interest. One, did you, as a stand-up, perform on Johnny Carson? I'm a big fan of. I'm Dying Up Here on Showtime, that's the mecca for all the comedians in the 70s.
It certainly was. Yeah, it certainly was for all of us starting out. The Tonight Show was the place to go, and it was Johnny. It wasn't the show. It was Johnny. It was Johnny's approval. And so when you get to do your first shot, it's a big deal. It was certainly a big deal for me. I actually only performed stand-up one time.
Okay.
My first time, 1982. And there's footage out there. I don't know why it's the only one that's ever out there. And I look like a 7-year-old. I mean, it's like my voice was high. I was nervous. And it didn't sound like me. And I go, gosh, I went a long time without laughs. And but when a few years later, I started doing the show pretty regularly with Johnny. But I didn't do stand-up. I would sit down on the couch, and I prepared material. So it's sort of a sideways version. You prepare your stuff, but it was much more conversational. And Johnny would chime in with questions, and he'd help you. And he was a genius. He was really so good in a way that nobody has been since. He would, not only as a comedian, he'd know how to help you, when to come in, when to stay back. And he was a fan, so he wanted you to succeed. There was no competition. Right. He was the king, and you were the kid, no matter how old you were, but he wanted you to succeed. And when you did well, he did well.
So it's funny you mentioned a little bit earlier, too, the fact that we have all this noise and all this news and all this other stuff. One thing we have so much of now, too, is mediums to deliver content. I mean, your 3 shows that are coming out now or are out now, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, 3 things that didn't even exist, 5 years ago, 10 years ago in terms of that. What do you make of this phenomenon with streaming and this quote-unquote golden age of television?
Well, it's interesting how quickly we get accustomed to everything. There was a period, 15 years ago where we didn't all have cell phones.
Right.
Or we had a phone, but we didn't have a device. And I don't remember anybody ever teaching how to operate it. You just jumped in and I guess I got to get one of these, and suddenly everybody can use it and everybody can type. Everybody knows how to do it. And same with this. The first time you hear about it, it's what? It's not on TV. It's on the streaming, and then boom, and then now we're in, and the technology changes, and we all quickly got with the program. So for those of us making content, it's great, because you're right, these shows, I think all 3 of the shows that I'm on would not have ever gotten made 10 years ago. Yep. And, there's people say there's a bit of a downside because there's maybe too much content and you can't get around to it. But I don't think that's such a problem because, they also aren't, the shows are not going away. So if you put a show on wherever, sometimes I'll get around to watching a show 2 years after it's been around. I'm busy. And then you sit down and go, hey, it's just as good. And some shows you want to, Stranger Things, you want to watch it while it's going on because everybody's talking about it. Yeah. Or, Game of Thrones. But a lot of things you're just all right. I just caught up with Fargo, in his 3rd year. And I went, okay, I didn't lose anything. It's great. I get it now. So I think it's only a good thing, and a lot of times you come up with an idea that isn't necessarily going to be a big smash hit, or it can't necessarily run for 7 years. So now you can say, guess what? You can do a show. It's only 10 episodes, and you're done, and it'll live forever. Yeah. And so this one, there's Johnny. I'm hoping we get to do some more because we got a lot of stories, and we got a lot of really talented actors, and it's really fun to write. But if it didn't, I'd be really content that we just told a great story for an entire season, and there it is. And it's out there forever.
Very cool, very cool. Are you a binger, or do you prefer the week-to-week format?
I'm not a real binger in that I just don't have the patience to sit and watch too many of anything in a row. I just, I get pulled away or I fall asleep. But I do find that shows that I like that are once a week, I will stockpile on them and just in case I get a break and I'll watch 2 at a time. Okay. But I do feel I totally feel like that piece of us that I can't wait till next week. I can't wait till next week. That muscle has gone away because
it has.
Right, and the appointment television is gone. That was also a real revelation about the Johnny Carson show. There's Johnny. In watching those clips, what struck me is, oh my gosh, we stayed up till 11:30 because that's when it was on. You didn't get the luxury of I'll watch it tomorrow when I'm on the treadmill. It's like, no, it ain't there.
Yep.
So by definition, it was a different world, and your television was more important to you because there wasn't as much.
Mm-hmm. So last question, too, as well, and I appreciate you. Thank you so much for taking some time to talk about this stuff. The TV reboots, I mean, Will and Grace is a big hit. Full House came back. X-Files is back. Any thoughts about a Mad About You revamp?
You know, I said to somebody I've been talking about it, I said, but I'm really only talking about it because everybody keeps asking me, so I'm suddenly talking about it. I had never for years never thought about it, and then like now it seems like, well, it's in the air and everybody's doing it. So I'm not as against it. I mean, for years I would say there's just no way I would go back because I was very content with how we ended it. We knew we were going to do our final season. We landed the plane and wrapped everything up beautifully.
Sure.
And then people talk about like, well, it kind of would be fun maybe to see where's that couple today. So I don't know. So it's it's not impossible. I don't know that I don't know that America is hankering for it. I don't know that I'm hankering for it, but you know, if some genius idea comes to us and it seems doable, it could be fun.
Cool, very cool. Well, Paul, thank you so much again. I appreciate you taking some time out. And the show airs tomorrow night, and we're on iTunes, iHeart, and all that fun stuff as well.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Thanks, Mike.
Welcome back to the Rogue Wave podcast. I told you that was still a great interview. And I even asked him your question, which was the binge question. No, it was the alien question, actually. I think you asked me about the alien question. I remember that. I remember getting asked specifically about that, I think, from you. And then I threw the binge question in because, you know.
Because you love that question. I don't know what.
I do. I thought he gave a great answer, though.
Yeah. But it's a typical answer. It's like I'm not a binge person, but I don't want to watch them week to week anymore. So, cake and eat it too kind of situation. Hedging his bets, baby. Hedging his bets. All right. That was our show for the evening. Ran a little long today, but that's okay. Catch Data Decoded right after this. Catch it on the website as well, too. Next week, we will be launching the next issue of Time Trader. So we'll be doing something time related with that. We're going to do a full-on review of Top Gun. And we can also probably do a full-on review of anything we want to, except for Obi-Wan, because it's still going. But we can do Stranger Things 2. Stranger Things 4. We won't review Stranger Things 2. Been a long time. By next week, there'll only be 2 episodes of Obi-Wan left. So, wow. Yeah. That's fast. All right. Let us know what you think. Comment. Chat. We'll be here. We will see you guys next week. Hi guys, Mike Dolce here from the Rogue Wave podcast. If you like this video, please feel free to like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. It really helps us out. Leave a comment, let us know what you'd like to see in future episodes, and tune in every Wednesday night, 8 p.m. Eastern for a brand new episode of the Rogue Wave